I'd like to welcome everybody tonight to a breakout session for us for a workshop for budget thoughts going ahead with 22-23, especially with focus on the federal monies that we have coming our way. And nobody sharpens a pencil sharper than Rick Timbs to bring us the numbers and the data behind it. And nobody advocates our legislators and educates them like he does either, as far as, you know, what they need to know to help us, to help our kids. So with that said, we'll turn it over to Rick Timbs.
That sounds great. Thanks, Robert. We're going to go through a little slide presentation I've got. Jim, did I send you a PDF of this thing so you have a copy?
Yes, you do. Yeah, thanks, Rick. And we will get that out right after our program.
Right after we're done here. Well, a couple things. One is thanks for being members of Statewide School Finance Consortium. We're still battling for better aid. This looks like a good package this year, but it does have some holes in it. They're really paying everybody on a flawed formula, but you already know that. Just pay attention. If you do, I'll get on Twitter. Here's my handles on Twitter for SSFC and me. If you want to follow me or something to follow what we're doing, but I've tried to reinforce things when I see area schools do things on Twitter. It's always nice to have someone else sending out some of your information. So really, I'm going to talk about a couple things about long-range considerations and some advocacy topics and strategies for you. And we're going to start off with Chris Act here, one of the new federal funds. Now, even though this federal fund source is divided up into a couple of parts, there's something that's really important that you have to know. It's kind of like, this is like an overview page, but if I had to pick out three things on this page, I would, or four things on this page probably, here's what I would tell you. First of all, you got to remember that the end of this grant should be September of 22, but it's extended by something known as the Tidings Amendment. You can ask for an extension to take you to September 30th, 2023. That's not far away from now. So that's about a year and a half away. So your opportunity to use this money is really restricted in terms of the amount of time you have. You have to obligate all the funds by then. Now, the other thing that's important is right down here. Funds do not have a supplement versus supplant requirement. And I'm going to talk about that pretty extensively. Now, what does that mean? In English, what it really means is, I don't know why they say it this way, but when you supplement, you're going to use the grant money to buy things you don't have. Okay? To supplant means that what you're going to do is you're going to use the grant money to help you pay for things you already have. So this is an extremely important thing because most federal grants do not allow you to they don't want you supplanting, they only want you supplementing. So this supplant is a very powerful tool for some of your districts. Now, depending upon the financial condition of your district, you may want to do a little more supplanting than supplementing, and I'll explain that in a second. But the key thing here is that you have to start thinking of how to do this in your budget. But there's another grant as well. This one's called ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. This one is extended to September 30th of 24. Now, what's so interesting about the September 30th dates is they are right in the first quarter of your school year. So in other words, you can't use them all year long into the next year. You have to obligate these, and they're supposed to be all paid out by October of that year. So because of the Tidings Amendment, it is extended to September of 24. Now, the key thing here is that the formulas for the distribution of this money was largely based on your Title I counts, which would be some type of like a demographic needs count. So that's why some districts got larger amounts than others and so on. But the key thing here is this does not have a supplant versus supplement requirement either. So let's get into some simple examples of what I mean by this. I'm going to keep moving this thing around so it matches where my words are so you can see this better. But here's a supplement example. Now, here's one I would not do. So let's start off with one we shouldn't do. Do not hire additional staff or purchase programs that will need to exist with money from the district's general fund after the end of grant support to the special aid fund. In other words, all this money from the federal money goes into a special aid fund. If you hire additional staff and the money is up, we'll say in September of next year, 23, for the first grant. If you need to keep these people on, you will have to immediately absorb the cost into your budget, and it will increase your budget with the same cost. Now, the interesting thing about this is, what are we talking about? Well, what they really would like you to do is maybe get some social workers, some mental health people in there, get some behavioral specialists, help kids with a lot of things that we're not normally doing. All that is great. So you should be supplementing with that, but then you have to understand that when the grant money is gone, if you do not want to all of a sudden take all these costs and add them to your budget, you'll have to discontinue them.
Oh, I'm
Or what you may have to do is keep them going and discontinue something else, which is rarely done in a school district. I mean, I'll make you a bet. You could think, if all of you put your heads together and say, geez, what have we cut out that we were doing in the last 10 years? There's not many items you'll be able to think of. I believe this could be a political problem for districts. So let's just say I hire a social worker, behavioral specialist, I get another guidance counselor for the elementary school, or I hire people for extra after school programs and summer school programs. All that very needy, very good, all good things to do. But then when the money goes away, how do I keep the program going? The only way to keep it going would be really to absorb it into your general fund budget. And considering these grants are a good chunk of change, it would be a big hit to your general fund budget. So people are hiring like teachers, teacher aides, teacher assistants, special duty personnel. Some people are getting school resource officers. The political dilemma here is, and you know as well as I do, once something gets into those school buildings and starts becoming a service, people want it continued. So there becomes an expectation. It seems to be, in my experience, that you may tell people, well, look, after the money's gone, these people got to go. But they forget that issue when the people got to go. They want you to keep them. And it becomes a bit of a battle. So another thing you could do with this is the second little bullet here. You can come up with newer and enhanced programs such as reading or math and remediation. But if these supports, this professional mentoring or professional development, must be continued past the life of the grant, you will have to pay for it out of the general fund. So what I would suggest you do is do things that will not need that type of thing. For instance, if you're going to get a teacher who's going to mentor other teachers, it's got to be clear if they're going to be a teacher on special assignment, that if they're coming out of the classroom and you're going to get a replacement, that sub in there is just for that period of time and that's it. Not that it'll work politically, but you have to make it clear. To me, I like the idea of using enhanced programs in reading, math, remediation, teacher supports, mentoring, and so on. And the reason I like that is because over the period of time you have the grant money, you can actually create a culture that will survive without the grant money. In other words, once you got everybody trained, they should be able to keep going, doing the same things they were doing as they were trained after the grant money goes away. Now, part of the dilemma I'm finding, and I'll tell you this as an ex-superintendent, many of you have probably run into this, reading, math, and remediation programs, teacher supports, they're expensive. But the key thing with some of these reading programs and math programs, if you do not do professional mentoring and professional development, they lose what they call the fidelity of the program. Over time, the teachers start falling away from what was the research-based program. And the program, after a couple of years, does not deliver the results you're after. So if I were you, I'd really put a huge amount of money into supports, professional mentoring, and so on, so that you develop a culture inside the building. For instance, if you have a new reading program, the elementary school staff has to be brought into that new reading culture and brought up to snuff and really supported. Now, some people are saying to me, well, you know what we're doing? We're hiring a couple 7th and 8th grade reading teachers. Well, I think that's a great idea. The only dilemma is that you really are trying to help these 7th and 8th grade kids who aren't reading very well. But the research on the efficacy of that strategy is pretty low. In other words, it usually doesn't work all that well. Where you should really put a lot of money is it's not, you don't want to deprive those kids. So yeah, you got to get them some temporary help. But the more you put into pre-K, K, 1, 2, early grades in reading and math with this money, the better off you will be. I think it will pay dividends. Now, when we get into the supplement example, we got a little something different. This is where you would take, say, for instance, Rick Timbs is working for you. He's a 4th grade teacher. What you would do is you would use the grant funds to pay me, but keep my cost in the budget. because some of you are actually going to run out of money over the next couple of years, because I'm going to talk to you about some funding cliffs coming your way. Because what's going to happen is, even though the state is paying a real good chunk of change this year in state aid, I think in 3 years it's going to stop doing that at this level. So I think we're in for a little rough road 3 years out. And additionally,
that's like awesome.
what's that? Somebody saying something? Nope, guess not. And also, there's going to be a federal funding cliff. So if you need to build fund balance, you should be trying to supplant some of this money. In other words, keep the cost in there. Now, why do I say keep the cost in there? And that's because the person you're paying out of the federal grant, each year of the grant, either their benefits or their pay will escalate. And if you keep the money in the budget, when the federal money goes away, you can bring them back into the budget because you've escalated over time, for a period of time, and therefore the expense will already be budgeted. You won't have to increase your budget. So the key thing is always try to do some supplanting and do some supplementing. The general purpose of the grant is supplement. But I'll tell you right now, I believe some of you are going to have some fund balance issues going down the road. Now, where would I put some of this money if we had all this fund balance? Well, one thing is, I say you should be taking a look at your reserves. I think some of your reserves could probably use a little boost. I think the controller is going to give everybody a hard time anyway over the unappropriated, unreserved 4%. And of course, we're all trying to lobby to get that 4% to 8, 10, 12%, so you can keep more money. The governor has just issued her thing to the legislature saying, look, I want a rainy day of 15%. All municipalities except for school districts have no percent limit. We're the only ones. I think we need more cash on hand. I'm starting to see with many of my clients and many of the school districts I talk to, they can't find bus drivers. They can't find bus monitors. They can't find bus aides. They can't find cleaners, custodians, maintenance mechanics. They can't find mechanics to work on the buses. Certain administrative and teaching positions are hard to come by. We're starting to see now that unions and other people, school districts themselves, are ramping up to stay competitive. I've got a school district called me up the other day and said, we got to change our long-range plan. I got to increase custodial pay by 17% because they make more money at McDonald's than they do here. And I can't get anybody. Everybody now is working for another district. I've lost almost all my custodial staff, and we're starting to lose days because I can't even get the buses on the road. That comes up another point. Buses, the cost of buses is escalating rapidly, 3 to 5% a year. A 67 passenger bus a couple of years ago was about $110,000. I'm now working with some districts that are buying the same bus over again, somewhere between 135 and 147. So what's happening, your costs will start escalating. Labor, I believe, is going to start escalating rapidly. And this inflation may last not only till the end of this year. So somebody says, well, what if it ends by the end of this calendar year? Well, that's great. It just leaves you with a high price. In other words, it's not going to escalate anymore, but it's not going down. You're not going to see regression of those costs. People are going to keep that money. I particularly like capital reserves. Now, here's what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is that many of you bought in your Smart Schools Bond Act infrastructure things, drops in rooms, technology closets, servers, and that type of thing. Swipe cards, cameras, terrific. But some of you bought a ton of laptops and iPads and things like that. They wear out, they get broken, they get dropped, and their operating systems age out and they won't work on new software. So to me, it's like, what's the plan to upgrade your technology plan in the future? Is there any way, if you could build fund balance, you could put money in a capital reserve for, say, technology purchases? Or what about this? It used to kill me when I was a superintendent. I'd look out the window every day during the summer, and half the custodial staff was mowing lawns at 48-inch lawnmowers. So I decided to save up the money and buy a bigger lawnmower so only one guy could mow the lawns in a week. So my point would be is, what about equipment like food trucks, plows, steak rack trucks, pickup trucks, delivery trucks, school vans? Where's the reserve for that? You can actually start reserving for that money. So you must have a long-range plan for that type of equipment. You can have a capital reserve for equipment. You can have a capital reserve for vehicles. You can have a capital reserve for technology. Right? You can have a capital reserve for classroom furniture. So the idea here is that you could use capital reserves for other things other than just plain capital projects. But I must tell you, the use of a capital project reserve is wonderful. It is one of the best gifts that keeps on giving financially to a school district. The smartest school districts, when they go to do a capital project, have already saved money in a capital reserve, or they have cash for it. Because what happens is, I'll give you an example. Say, for instance, you did a $10 million capital project and you used $2 million of the 10 million was capital reserve. You're only going to borrow $8 million, but you will get state aid on 10 million plus interest. So you will get aid on the money you're using coming back to you. And if you wish, you can use some of that to rebuild a new capital. So I really think we've got to start taking a look at long-range planning for your district. Where are you going with this money? When will some of this money go away? What will you inherit into your long-range plan in terms of your general fund? Where are the funding cliffs? So these are things that I think you really got to spend some time looking at. Now, some people are going to use some of these grant monies for basically some capital improvement, which is great because it is allowed in the grants, but you have to have the grant approved by the state education department first. Once the grant is approved by the state education department to use it for your capital purpose, it restricts you to just that purpose. You have more wiggle room in a regular capital project than you will with these grants, because these grants are going to be specific for an item or two, a thing, HVAC work, windows, whatever the heck it is that you're going to put in there. You can't then change all the windows to a driveway. That will not be allowed. So the key thing here is you have to still have the capital project approved by the Office of Facilities Planning. So here's the dilemma as I see it. And here's where I'm going to hit and sneak down into here too. First of all, once SED approves your federal grant for capital work, you've got to have your school attorney write a board resolution allowing the board to do the capital project. They have to cite the exact grant, the exact amount in the grant, and the exact scope in the grant for the project. Now, keep in mind that you need this board resolution. No public vote is needed, okay? But you can either do a separate project with just federal funding, or you can mix it with other voter-approved projects. But remember, if you're going to mix it with some other project that's going to be voter-approved, you got to put the money together. Then you're going to have to actually separate the money out for accounting purposes on the expenses when you file your forms at the end. Now, keep in mind that the portion that is used for the grant will not get building aid. Okay, it will get, the grant will pay for it in full, hypothetically. But people forget that all building projects require seeker designation. You have to have that to get the building permit. So before you can actually even approve of a resolution by the board, if you're going to do this as a separate project, you're going to need a seeker designation. Now, if you're going to have a scope and a seeker designation, and you're going to do contractual work, you're going to need somebody else. You're going to need an architect seal to apply to Office of Facilities Planning at SED to get your building permit. So what happens is you're going to have to apply and keep amending these forms, and then you have to secure funds using what they call the FS25 form. But my worry is this: who's paying for all this until you get the money? It would be you. So I would look at your cash flow to make sure that during the pre-planning phase, the submission of plans and specs, before you actually get any money from the state through this federal grant, you have money to float the cost of the project temporarily. Now, I really don't know when you're going to get your money. They have not been specific in terms of what documentation you need to prove how much money you've spent and how much money you need. It appears that what they've actually published is, we could probably give you the money that you've spent if it meets muster. In other words, if it passes muster with us, here's appropriate. And 30 days after that. Well, 30 days after that, how many forms you're going to have to fill out to keep getting the money every 30 days? So I think this is going to be kind of a little bit of a reporting nightmare. It can be done, but I think it's going to be a little more paperwork than people realize. And then, of course, when it's all done, you put in the final cost report. The big question is, are they going to pay you the rest of the money when you say the project is done? Because you're going to have to put in this cost report. And I don't know how soon you'll get that. I don't know what other reporting requirements are going to be. So to me, I think it's a great idea to use it in capital work. But the other dilemma you've got is the one grant is done in September of 23. ARPA is done in September of 24. You got to get the work done by those dates or you lose the grant. So this is going to be a problem. So I think you've got to make sure that whatever you do, you work with your architect to make sure that it's not a long lead item. What I mean by a long lead item is, well, we're going to order, or we're going to put in new boilers, and SED says we can do it. And we put in our specs and plans, and we got them all approved. We did our secret, we did everything right. Okay, and then the architect says, we can have the boilers arrive in December of 23 for your grant that's up in September of 23. December 23 is too late to put the boilers in. So whatever it is you choose, make sure you can get it done in time to use the grant money. Once you pass that date, the grant's gone. Okay, they don't hold it for you. All right, now this is the next piece of information I want to go over with you. And I'm going to try and move some of this around a little bit to make this a little easier to read, although I'm just going to have to kind of, let's go through the titles first. This is the foundation aid. This is where I'm worried about a fiscal cliff for some of you. This is foundation aid in the current year. This is what the governor has proposed for foundation aid next year. This is the difference between the two. Now, Adirondack as an example, we use Adirondack, Camden as an example, we can use Kaz, we can use Chittenango, here's Clinton, DeRuyter, all these are in Madison, Oneida, and Herkimer counties, all the districts. Here's Oriskany, here's Remsen, here's Sequoia Valley. So you can see the ones, they have this orange right here, and it says 3%. What the governor said is, if you are fully funded in foundation aid, in other words, the current formula, as flawed as it is, says that you're not entitled to any more money. I promise I will give you at least 3% more. So therefore, they're going to get the 3% more. You notice these numbers match up right there, 3% more. All right, now, the next problem is we got Brookfield, we've got Canastota, let's see if we get some Madison, Little Falls, New Hartford, Mount Markham, New York Mills. Let's see, what do we got here? Rome, Utica, West Canada. You can see them right here. All the ones that have the white number right here, the white. You'll see they're blue over here. They match blue. What we're going to do with you is whatever we owe you to get you fully funded, we're going to give you half the money this year and the rest of the money next year. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you an increase. So what happens is, let's use this as an example. So let's just pick one out here. Let's go to New Hartford. So we're going to get 1.6 million, which is an 18.59% increase in foundation aid. Then they're going to get another 16.7, and then they will be fully funded, just like all the ones that are in orange. So what happens in 23, 24, though, with the ones that are in orange? I simply made up a schedule whereby they're going to get 3%. Now, I don't know what they're going to get. The governor and the legislature could say 2. They could say nothing. They could say 1.5. They could say something, but I use 3. So if you'll notice, some of these districts will get a little bit of an incline, but many of them will get a big decline. So let's use, we'll say Oriskany, I think is, let's say Oriskany is an example. That's a 3%. Let's see here. All right, let's use Rome. So they're going to get 6.4, 6.4, then 3% from then on is $2 million. So if you'll notice, for instance, here we go. New York Mills is going to be going from $206,000 more a year for the next 2 years down to maybe 93 if the governor decides to keep that 3% rule. So what I'm saying is there's this huge fall off for the districts that are getting the bigger money now, because then everybody will be paid up. And the current formula says you're really not entitled to any more money. But my example here is pretending that you are entitled to money. So I've increased it by 3%. Look at Whitesboro here, 871, 871, 653. So that's a $220,000 decrease in the rate of increase, if that makes any sense. Waterville, same thing, 332, 332, 268. You can see these differences. Utica, it's astounding because they are so far behind in being paid. 19.6, 19.6, 4.6 million. So what has to happen here is you've got to understand that we may be facing a pretty significant rate of increase funding, Cliff, going into the future for the biggest category of all your state aid, foundation aid. So forewarned is forearmed. Now I'm hopeful that we can update some of the formula. Some of you people will be entitled to more money, but right now, everybody seems, the legislators seem to, oh, okay, well, you're getting all money, you're getting at least 3%, that's pretty good. Now, here's what I worry about with the 3% for Oneida City, Poland, Remsen, and so on. Inflation is now at 7.5% for the entire rest of the year. The entire rest of the year, at least. And it might go higher. What good is 3% going to do you? So that's what I'm worried. So the state's expenses for foundation aid coupled with expense-driven aids are going to create a big escalation in state costs. In other words, where's the money coming from that the state is all of a sudden able to pay everybody all this money? Two major sources. They are the federal government, and that money will be up in the year 23, 24. That'll be the last year of it. And second, they're counting on personal income tax growth. So they're counting on people making more money so they can actually tax people more. Now, I don't know how long that's going to last, but I'm not so sure if we have a downturn in the economy, that's going to work for us. I think we're going to have a significant rapid increase till 23, 24. And then I think we don't know what's going to happen. So in 24, 25, what happens then? Will the state continue to keep paying this money, even though the formula says you're not entitled to any more money? Now, one of the factors you have to keep in mind is what's one of the major parts of the formula that drives money your way or makes you save harmless? It's your enrollment. If your enrollment continues to decline and they do not escalate the rate they pay per student, chances are you might become a little more save harmless faster than you think. So this could be a problem. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, I believe your fixed costs are going to go up considerably with contractual obligations, maybe even significantly. I think this could be a problem for you. For instance, I'm starting to see in many parts of the state where they're starting to pay bus drivers $20, $22, $23 an hour. And I'm not talking about the rich parts of the state down in Westchester, right? They can't get cleaners, they can't get custodians. This bus driving thing is, now some of you may have contract busing. So we don't hire bus drivers. Well, all you got to do is see the news at the beginning of the school year to realize the contract bus companies are having problems finding bus drivers too. What's that going to do to your contracts? It's going to escalate. So I really do believe during the time period we're using federal funds, especially if we're supplanting in our budgets, it's going to create and provide additional services and amenities, and people will expect them to continue. Meanwhile, I think the state's support and the federal money is going to wane. So these two things are going to come into play. The next problem you've got, of course, is aside from inflation, around here we've got changing pilot agreements all over the place. And pilots agreements and changing capital exclusions are going to wreak havoc on the tax cap. So if you know your two major sources of revenue for every district in the room right now is actually state aid and taxes. It's your two major sources of funds. And both of them play into the capital exclusion in the tax cap. Now, what I think we've got to do is just to kind of review, you should be taking careful account of what your long-range plan says you should or should not be doing with federal funds and capital projects, as I've indicated. You should be looking at how much you're supplementing your budget that you may have to inherit later on versus how much you're supplanting to build fund balance. And you have to find out to what degree, if you're going to bring any of this money back into the general fund, how much it's going to be, so you can know how much you're going to have to increase your budget. Now, the rest of it is that while you may look like right now you are flush with cash, I'm really concerned that districts may say, well, look, we got a lot of money right now. Let's help everybody out and let's not go to the cap. I'm really concerned about that. I'm going to give you an example of what happens when you don't go to the cap and what happens when you do go to the cap. And you can decide what kind of future you want your district to have. But while you may be flush with money right now, I'm not so sure you'll be flush with money 5 years from now. Okay, and that's what I'm worried about, particularly when these outside funds are exhausted. All right. Now, keep in mind that The investments in federal funds could save money long-term if you do more supplanting than if you do more supplementing. So keep that in mind. And of course, we still don't know how these federal funds will be audited, so we've got to be careful. So let me go through a tax cap example for you. So this is just a hypothetical example, and I'm making it work a certain way here so I can actually make a point. What I've done with the tax cap calculation here is I've said, let's pretend that the tax cap calculation that brought us to this year has to be based on the prior year's tax levy. So I picked $10 million, a nice round number. So that was what you collected in the 2021 year as you're calculating your tax cap for 21-22. Now, as you know, you have a tax base growth factor. The problem with this number is 1.0041. I don't know if you're aware of that, but that's an unbelievably small number. That's telling me that the tax base of this school district, in my example, is not moving very far. And many of our tax bases aren't moving very far either. That's why I put this number. If there was a number 1 instead of this 0 right here, then I know you're building tax base. Now, I want you to be aware that this has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with assessed values, equalization rates, or recalibrations or reassessments in towns. This has to do with the literal growth of a tax base, something that can be taxed now that couldn't be taxed before. Somebody built a barn, a business, a couple houses, whatever it is accounting for this. All right. Now, this number is 3 years old. So you're right off the bat, they make you use old data because the other data hasn't been audited. So if you notice, there's a times here, say times. So you multiply these two, and now you get a new number. Then what you have to add is any pilots you had in the previous year. Now, why do you add the pilots? It's because you didn't collect them in your levy, you collected them separately. Pilots are payments in lieu of taxes. In other words, somebody gave, I put in a solar farm, and now instead of paying taxes on all that land for the first 10 years, I'm just going to pay, like maybe the first year I'm going to pay $170,999 instead of $200,000 as if it was on a tax roll. So I get a break to the solar farm. So that's what this is. But then you subtract last year's capital levy. What is the capital levy? It's an exclusion, they call it. What that is the sum total of all your debt for buses and capital projects, but you subtract from that debt your state aid. You have to also add all the capital works being done by the BOCES, and these 3 BOCES are not doing huge amounts of capital work. Most of it's rent, so that's a good thing for you, minus any state aid. So it's the part that you're supposed to collect when you collect taxes. For those of you who've done capital projects at all, you know that in the resolution for the capital project, it must contain words similar to this, and levy the tax thereto. In other words, you can go out for the, $2 million capital project. You could put $1 million in capital reserve against it. You can borrow the other $1 million, but you must have a clause in there that says you have the ability to tax to pay for the rest of that project that isn't going to be covered by state aid. So you have the ability to tax for it. This is that portion. So you subtract that out because you were supposed to collect this money to pay off the debt. Then what is the allowable growth factor. This is the CPI. Now, I was very angry a couple of weeks ago because there was a headline that said, the tax cap is limited to 2%. Levies can't increase more than 2%. So for those of you who know me, you know what I would do. I actually called the controller in Albany. Well, he wouldn't answer my phone call, but the deputy controller did, much to his chagrin. And I said, you lied on this headline. And he said, well, the headline's a lie, but I didn't write it, so I didn't lie. I said, okay, can you fix it? He says, well, it's too late now. It's already out. So they didn't fix it. The tax cap is not and never has been 2%. The term 2% tax cap means that this number cannot go over 1.02, which it's going to go over for next year. But for last year, the number is 1.0123. This does not limit the levy to 2%. It doesn't. It's one part of this one calculation, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 calculations. It's one part of it. There is no such thing as the 2% tax cap. Now, some of you say, well, everybody thinks it is. Well, whose fault is that? I think what we ought to be doing is at board meetings, you ought to be putting your tax cap up just like this and proving that it's not a 2% tax cap every year. That's what I would do, because I think we're the Board of Education, we're superintendents and business officials. Our job is education. You got to educate the people. It's not a 2% tax cap. If you'll notice, the pilots for the next year are going up. So they're going to pay more money. So I have to subtract that money out. And notice that the capital levy is also going up. So now I have to collect more money. On purpose, I made this tax cap come out to be 2.49%, $249,000 over the previous year's levy. But all the CPI was 1.23. So it just proves there's no such thing as a 2% tax cap. Now, so you could do this with your own numbers. So what I do is then I say, okay, where are we going with this thing? Well, the first thing you do is if you collect the 2.49 like you're supposed to, because you are obligated to pay this debt. If you do not collect this money, this debt will still get paid. It will come out of your reserves and out of your fund balance. But let's just say you do. You say, okay, if the tax cap comes out 2.49, I'll collect it. The next year, that's the number you start with. So how much you collected. And you do the same formula over. Now, what I've done for simplicity here is I kept the growth factor the same, kept the CPI the same, and I even froze the pilots and the levy. All things being equal, look what happens to the cap now. See, what was driving the cap up wasn't this CPI, it was the growth in the pilot and the growth in the capital levy. When pilots go up, okay, it drives tax caps down. When capital levies go up, it drives tax caps up. Notice the difference in the sizes of the numbers. So technically speaking, the next year, if they had collected the cap and they had the same amount of debt and they had the same amount of pilot, their tax cap would be 1.6. But what happened to the 2% tax cap? It doesn't exist there either. So what if they were to keep going with this hypothetical example and we kept all the numbers the same? All we kept doing is, and you'll notice, look what happens to the tax cap. It stabilizes. See that? It stabilizes. The thing that changes the tax cap is the changes in pilots, the levy, and this growth factor. Those are the big ones. This one in our area isn't going to mean much. So technically, you could collect the 2.4, but, and I've seen this happen, inevitably, somebody somewhere at some meeting says, let's not collect the cap. Everybody thinks it's 2%. Let's collect 1.99. So here we go. I did this. Here's the same computation, only now I'm going to collect 1.99. Instead of collecting $249,000, I'm going to collect an extra $199. In our parlance about business officials, we call this leaving money on the table, $50,000. So in other words, this $516,000 you're going to have to pay out of your budget. You're going to pay for it yourself out of your own budget. In other words, you're going to take some of your reserves and some of your fund balance, and that's how you're going to pay this bill. Because by law, this bill must be paid. So you refuse to collect it, even though people voted to pay this money. So this is going to be a problem because as we go forward, I'm now going to start off the next year with 199 and start doing the computations to stay the same. I'm going to lose $823. It sounds like chump change because I can't use the 10,249 because that's not what I collected. But now is a chance for us to do a little analogy of what this means. So somebody says, okay, so we lost 50,000, big deal. We lost 823. What's the big deal? Well, let's make up an analogy. Let's just say for 5 days in a row, Monday through Friday, I'm supposed to pay you $100 a day. But at the end of the first day, Monday, I decide, well, I'm not going to pay you $100. I'm going to pay you $90. You are now short $10. The next day comes, what am I going to pay you? I'm going to pay you based on what I paid you the day before. I'm going to pay you another $90. You're not short $10 now. Now you're short $20. And by Wednesday, you'll be short $30. And by Thursday, $40, and by Friday, $50. Let's just say Friday, all of a sudden I say, you know, I feel bad now. I didn't give you what I was supposed to. I'm going to give you a 5% raise. I'm not going to give you a raise on $100. I'm going to give you a raise on $95. You'll never see any of that money again, ever. And this is what it looks like in a tax cap. So here's the one I showed you that if you kept it going, you collected what you're supposed to, you collected a 2.49, instead of lowering it a lousy 0.5%, here's what's going to happen to you. You're going to lose $50,000 that year. Then next year, because you now can't collect the 50,000, everything's lower, you're going to lose the 50 again, plus 823, meaning that year you're going to lose 50,824 on top of the $50,001 the year before. Then the next year, again, you're going to depress, you're going to lose another 50,001 and 823 and the 836 because you artificially lowered your levy. So now you're going to lose 51,660 plus 50,824 plus 50,001. I think you're seeing the picture. By the time we get over to here, what we've got here is we have lost $256,367 you will never see again for the rest of your life. Now, if your budget 5 years from now, you could say, we won't need $258,000. By the way, if you have a $10 million levy and you save everybody $50,000, how much do you think the average person saves? A couple of McDonald's dinners, maybe that's it. But here's the problem. That your levy now, this levy of $10,870,000, let me back this up, could have been $10,923,000. So you lose another $53,000 because the levy itself is low. You're underneath water now, $311,000, and you've been paying this debt service on this capital project all by yourself and not collecting taxes for it. So that means you're going to hit your fund balance. So I think you could be in big trouble. What district in the room here now that we're talking doesn't need $311,000 in 25-26? All we did is I dropped a 0.5% 1 year. And you notice I collected the tax cap every year thereafter. All I did is this one time. Some of you have not collected the tax cap in years past. You have already lost money that you can never recover. And if the federal money goes away and the state money starts coming in, our costs escalate because of inflation, labor contracts, the cost of doing business, you're going to need all the money you can get. And that's why I'm worried. I'm paid to worry, and I believe in long-range planning. But there's more to this. Next year, inflation's going to 2%. This number will become 2%. So what I did is I froze all the numbers again, just like I told you I would, only I moved the allowable growth factor to 2%. Instead of 1.23%, 2%. And now look what happens. The cap goes up, right? The cap stays up above 2%. What happened to the 2% tax cap? There's no such thing as a 2% tax cap, even when you use the 2%. And if you look at this one, here's where they went down low. They didn't collect the money. Now when they use the 2%, they're almost right back where they started because of the inflation factor in the formula. None of these formulas, if you'll notice, there's not a single tax cap I've shown you in 3 pages of tax caps that has come out to be 2%. Now, but to make it worse, what happens when the pilot decreases? Well, now I've taken the pilot from 182 down to 164. So I've decreased the pilot, and look at the difference between these two. It drives the tax cap up, and it's supposed to drive it up. Why? That's because a part of the pilot is going into the tax base, and the only way you can get it is the tax for the money. 3 years ago, I had explained to a district that they were going to increase their tax levy by 4%, and everybody's taxes were going to go down because they had so much growth in the district. Okay, now some of you may start to have this over time when some of these big pilot agreements in the region come off pilots. But the key thing is when the pilot goes down, the tax cap goes up. Look at this one. Here it is. When they took off the 0.5%, they're back higher than when we started our original example because the pilot went down. So it behooves us to explain to people what is happening and why the tax cap works, and why we tax what we tax. You do not have to go to the cap. All these numbers will get you to a simple majority plus one person. But I know everybody wants to give the taxpayers a break. I understand that. But what I'm worried about is you will not be able to recoup any money you lose if you need money 5 years from now. So that's what I'm worried about. So the key thing is obviously we're all after equitable distribution of funds. We want adequate funds, not only in the formula, but on our own long-range plans. We want a phase-in plan for the next few years. You should be looking at long-range planning. How much money are you going to need to float your budget in 26, 27? That's what I think everybody should be answering. And don't forget, sound financial plan to sustain state aid has got to be developed by the state. And if they're not doing it, and I'm afraid we're going to end up in a funding cliff. Can I answer any questions from anyone about my presentation?
I have a couple questions as well.
Sure.
A couple things. How likely do you think the state is to increase the undesignated fund balance this year? I mean, I can't believe the traction it's gotten in just the last year.
I agree with you 100%. What I'm a little worried about is that I belong to the superintendent's group because I'm a retired superintendent, Robert. You're going for 8%. I think it's got to be 10 to 12. I really think we got to have it higher than that, you know, especially when you're in a smaller district. But look at it this way, 8% of nothing's nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So seriously, even if they were to, it's got to be increased rapidly. So to me, I'd be saying 10 to 12 is what I like. The governor's looking for 15 in her own budget, for heaven's sake. The town, county, and fire departments, and I know I was a fire commissioner. I know, Brian, you're in the fire department. You have no limits. You know, it's because something could happen to a blasted truck that cost a fortune. So you got to be safe. You need this money. And so you try to save it, keep the rainy day fund going. So I'm with you, Robert. It's got to be done. I hope they do increase it at least to 8. I think what has me a little bothered is that the proposal is to have it go to 8 until like the year 24, 25, and then it would go back to 4.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
To me, it's like, what the heck are we doing? So to me, I think we got to have movement forward. So I would pressure the school boards, or even with your own legislators, Garrett, Marianne, Button, John, and Joe I'll call them if you want, and just start, the other ones in your area and say, look, I know the groups are looking at 8, and it would be great if we could get it. Maybe the year after that, it's got to go to 10, and the year after that to 12 or something, but you got to start somewhere. So Robert, I'm with you. I think we got a good chance at it, but I've seen good chances fall away, you know what I mean, between April 1st and June 30th.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
one of the things is, how likely do you think it is that, and you've talked about this for years, that the data that the tax cap is built on, 5, 6, 7, 8 different sets of data, how likely is it, do you think, that they are to update any of those before they make a change moving forward?
All right. I don't think they'll do it this year. And I think they're really reluctant to change anything in the tax cap. Okay, because they don't want to make it look like they made it so people could be taxed more. I think that's what they're afraid of. One of the things almost every group is asking is that the pilot value be added to the tax-based growth factor, that first number that comes from the real property tax services. So you don't get that bump up and down, when the pilot moves around. So that you don't have a variation of the taxable property versus the non-tax. You know what I mean? In terms of
and one of the things we spoke to the legislators about just recently was, schools aren't even given notification that, all of a sudden, like I said, a solar farm could be up overnight, and the school district is a historical entity. They're notified after the fact. Agreed. We don't get a seat at the table to vote, but we might not even be aware of it until that horse is out of the barn.
I agree with you 100%. It ought to be that any IDA or entity that can grant a pilot must give the school district a seat at the table prior to any decision. But here's the problem with that. When I was superintendent of Oriskany, I had the same problem that you're talking about. I mean, I battled it out with that IDA till the cows come home. Because remember, we had the airport. At the time, it was the airport, remember?
Yep.
And there was like the Ramada Inn. There was a bunch of whole little businesses up there, and a ton of them have pilots. Well, what happened is all of them quit paying their pilots. They didn't even pay them. So I went to the IDA and I said, you're not paying their pilots. And the IDA said, of course, the IDA guy is different now, much different, please believe me. But the guy at the time said, yeah, so what? I said, what do you mean, so what? It's our revenue. He goes, look, we grant the pilot. We have no enforcing mechanism. I'm thinking, what the heck? but we didn't even have a seat at the table. So I'd send them a letter every month. Anything coming up, anything on the docket? Oh yeah, we'll let you know. And it was always after the fact.
Yeah.
What I'm worried about is I cannot speak about our IDA and the related entities to that. But you know, it's possible that you could get a seat at the table with the decision has already been made.
So Rick, well, who would you say we should be contacting? The head of the local IDAs in Herkimer?
Well,
Oneida?
what I think is I think you got to contact your legislators to make it so that you must be included in these things. You don't have to contact the IDA guys. I think what you could do is if you go, I think ASBO and NISCUS has something on that if you want to look it up.
Okay,
About that, or maybe even school boards might have a state school boards association.
right, okay.
You know, call one of those guys up and say, what do you got here about this pilot so we can be included? We'd like to hop on that bandwagon with our legislators.
Because there is growth in the region now, you know.
Oh, yeah, there is.
With speed and.
Yeah, Wolf Speed and all the rest of this. Well, wait, well, here's the thing. Wolf Speed will be granting pilots, so it'll help the district out. That's going to be great. But the thing is, it'd probably be more valuable if it was fully taxed and on the rolls, if you get my drift. So that pilot over time will start to wane. Now, it might be 10 years from now and it's somebody else's problem, but there's a sacred trust here. In other words, I'm supposed, when I leave a school district, whether I retire or somebody runs me over in the road, the truth of it is I'm supposed to leave those people in good shape, right?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Questions for the group?
Comments?
Rick, if they don't change the basic formula and whatever, what is ever going to happen to our little schools that have seen a tremendous decrease in enrollment?
I think it's going to be a real problem. I'll tell you what Tom, here's what I'm suggesting right off the bat. They've got to change the amount. It's called the foundation amount. That's what it's simple word, foundation amount. It's the first number in the formula, Tom. And what that is how much they're going to pay per kid. That has been derived from 2006 formula and ramped up in today just using inflation. You really got to figure out how much it costs to educate a kid and then use that number instead. The number last year was $6,717. It doesn't cost, it costs a lot more than that to educate a kid. So
now, are they taking that cost across the state and say, everybody, that's what it costs, or do they look at your school?
Well, here's the thing. What they did is they used when they did it originally, they did it based on what they call successful schools. What they did is they went to school districts whereby they had high rates of Regents mastery students and found out what it was. By the way, the number came out closer to $12,000, but then they said, well, let's take out transportation. Let's take out operations and maintenance, capital project work. I don't know if you're familiar with the term AOE per taboo, which is a technical term, but what they did is they take out everything except the educational program and they cut the number more than half. And then say, well, this is good enough, we'll use this. But wait a minute, you got to get the kids to school. You got to have a school building. You know, I mean, give me a break. So I think that's got to be revisited. I got to believe that number is significantly higher. Look at how some people take their budget and divide it by the number of kids they have and how much it costs. So that could be a simple way. But here's the problem with that. There are some schools that have basic programs. Other schools have got a lot of electives and AP courses and 311s and all this kind of stuff. Their cost is innately higher, if you get my drift, unless they have a population density that will drive it down lower.
Right? See, like in Richfield, we've got over less than half of the enrollment that we had 20 years ago. But we still got the same expense for the building and we're still running, you know, the same bus routes. Our cost per student is.
I'll tell you what, I'm not saying what the governor will say, but I'll tell you what the division of budget would say, having worked with those guys. Richfield Springs, where's that? And why is that still there?
Yeah.
Their answer is merger.
Well,
That's
Rick,
my way.
we know what happens with mergers, and in this region, we have led the state. We've had over, out of the number of mergers, we've had over half in the 3-county area. So we've done our part, you know?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. But the thing is we're losing kids like so fast is what's happening. So what's starting to happen, I'll tell you in other parts of the state, it's starting to creep up. They're not merging, but what they're doing is they're tuitioning, or they're going to central high schools or something like that. So that's what they're starting to do. In the Albany area, they're doing it. In Western New York, they're doing it all over the place, especially in Southern Western New York.
And we've
got
talked about that too, a
Yeah,
regional, yeah.
3 schools that are accepting tuition students in high school or elementary, one or the other.
Yeah, keep the K-6 population local and then.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, that's another thing. You know, there should, if you really want regional high schools, then you gotta get a law to have regional high schools. But the problem you have is everybody, the school, especially in high school, you know, I was a high school teacher for God's sake. The high school and the school building and the elementary school are the center of these communities.
Right.
I mean, you know, you go to a ball game for the whole town's there, for God's sakes. It's great. I mean, it's fantastic. It's the glue that keeps us together. Look, I've seen superintendents lose their job by mentioning we should change the mascot. Think about it.
Yeah.
But that's where our head is. But I got news for you. Bean counters in Albany are going, well, that you want to keep it. I mean, it's up to you. So I think that's part of the dilemma, Tom. Does that answer your question? It's not going to be an easy fix. You know what? They're using the 2000 census also to determine poverty in your school district.
Right,
Now,
which
they
is
could use the
tremendously
small area
changed
and
for
income.
us.
Yeah, they could use another statistic, which isn't perfect either, but at least it'd be more modern.
Right,
See, to me, there's two things that need to be looked at in the formula, 2 categories to think. First of all, they're the wrong thing, like the foundation aid amount's the wrong number, just plain the wrong number. Or in principle, it's not the right number, it's not the right statistic to use. Right? I like people say to me, well, wait a minute, if we use a different statistic than the one there, is that going to help me? I have to say, in some cases, it may matter to you, but it really doesn't, you know, are we going to use the right statistic or not? You know, like they also use FRIPL, free and reduced price lunch, right? How many of you have the breakfast and lunch programs that are free for the kids right now?
Yeah, a lot of them.
Okay, yeah, a lot of you, right. Well, guess what? They don't have to hand in FRIPL data anymore.
Right.
So your FRIPL data is going to start falling apart. So you're going to look wealthier. So they got to take that direct certification that they use for that breakfast and lunch program and use that instead of FRIPL. Okay?
Yeah.
You got a 40-page formula here.
Rick, how good do you think the 2020 census data was? I got the impression from some people that it was basically cut short, so it's not to be any good to anyone.
It's not good to anyone. Nope, not for anything we're going to use. Nope. And by the way, the 2010 census, they forgot to even ask the poverty questions. That's why they didn't use it. It's written right into law, by the way. If you look at 3602 ed law, and I know none of you suffer from that much insomnia that would do it, you will find that it cites that they must use the 2000 census because they couldn't figure out what else to use.
Yeah.
Well, now we got something else, and it's not perfect, but at least it's more recent. I think what we got to do is this is going to have to be like evolutionary as they change these things. I think there's a couple things they could change. For instance, by the way, when the governor Cuomo passed his budget last year, when he not passed his budget, I take that back. When he had his executive budget last year, you know that 3% I showed you for your districts that are safe harmless? His percent was 0.25, quarter of a percent. Okay, now legislator brought it up to 3, by the way. But what they also did is he used the 2000 census in his formulas, and he also used FRIPL in his formulas. But when the legislature added money on, they used the SAPE, small area and income poverty estimate, the feds that I was suggesting, and then they used direct certification, the other one I suggested. So there's a movement toward that. But I think the governor just came in and she didn't have much time, so she just used the formula.
Right.
And then said, I don't know what to do with the rest of them, give them 3%. Well, geez, inflation 7.5. I mean, I got to tell you, if this had been last year and Governor Cuomo said give him 3%, I would have said, holy cow, somebody hit him in the head. But seriously, this 3% I think is a good gesture, but we got to get more than 3%. Some of you are so close to safe harmless that it's better for you to get the 3% than what they owe you.
Yeah.
So I think the thing is that remember, I know you had your meeting with your legislators, but I'm suggesting that you try not to make advocacy an event. You try and make it a process. Every now and then, just call them up and say, I got another idea. I got another idea. Just keep adding to the list. Just make sure that all of you are working from the same list. You get my drift.
Yeah, Rick, we've got your related recommendations that we're going to use as kind of a springboard. So thank you.
Right, that's what to do. So you pick out 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them because they can't handle 10 of them, forget it.
Right.
But you pick out the 3 or 4 or 5 and you just, every BOCES hammers them home over and over. So for instance, I remember what we used to do is like, we'd say, okay, so Jim was at Waterville, I'm at Oriskany, got Brian's over there at Waynesboro. I go see the senator and assemblyman or whatever, and I say this. And the next Friday, you know what I mean? The New York Mills contingent, Richfield Springs contingent, you know what I mean? See what happens. And they say the same thing. But, I also used to bring a parent with me, like a PTO president or something, because they vote. So to me, it's always superintendent, business official, board member at least, and then a citizen who votes, who has kids.
Yeah.
Right. And what happens is I used to have, of course, I'm a nutcase. Everybody knows this. We would practice before we got in there. Who's going to say what? Because I didn't want them taking us off topic.
No.
If you go down, remember we used to go down all the time for that,
Yeah.
the school boards one. We spent more time in Senator Gribel's office trying to get a photographer to get the group picture than we actually did to talk about what we were there for.
And if you're not focused, Rick, they do this too.
Oh yeah. Hey, Jim, how you doing? Man, how you? I haven't seen you since. Here's what's going on in their head. Okay, you know why? Because after you leave, AARP shows up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Then after you leave, the construction trade shows up.
We know.
And after you leave, some guy from New York City who they don't know from Adam wants rental change down in 42nd Street. So in all fairness, they are barraged. But you can go to Albany all you want, but they're home every Friday.
Right. Yeah.
Get on their calendar.
We do. We have their calendar, Rick, and like you said, it's no longer an event. It's 12 months out of the year now.
Exactly. That's exactly the way to do it. And of course, the lucky thing is I live here, so they all know me. So I see them all the time and talk to them. So and they will call and ask questions.
Oh yeah, they do. They'll
call me. I get calls like 8 o'clock at night. I'm watching TV. Rick, I know this is really weird, but you got a minute? A minute? I'm on the phone for an hour and I have explained part of the formula. But I mean, to me, I love it. Yeah. I like it because to me, here's what we do. We're here to help kids out. And that's really why we do this work. Because in the end, they're the benefactors of our work. We got to have enriched programs. It's, look at what we found out during COVID. No broadband. Huh.
Yeah.
I was at my daughter's house trying to watch a kid sign on. Right. The mother's on the phone. We're doing a FaceTime with the mother. It was killing me. We got the whole class in front of me, just like you guys are now. I'm saying the computer, the laptop will not open. We're saying, yeah, it just opens just like a lid. You just kind of open it up like a lid. It opens up, it's like a book. It won't open. I said, could you put it closer to the screen? Yeah, she's trying to open the hinge side.
Jeez.
You know what it is? It's not that she was stupid. She was frustrated. Yeah. She was upset. The kid's going, well, I gotta do it. Everybody's standing there, wait. Little kids, they're like, Mom, let's go, Mom. Meanwhile, okay, now how do you turn this thing on? Well, there's a button over there on your right hand side. Just push that down. Okay, now what do I do? Well, now you got to get on the Google Meet or something. How do we do that?
Well, Rick, you talk about programming. Our aha moment was a couple of years ago. We had a student who was valedictorian at one of our schools, could not get into Geneseo because didn't have the sufficient programming.
That's
Rick?
Correct. That is absolutely correct. So, matter of fact, I was doing a workshop with about 100 people, and a guy stood up and said that. I was so humiliated, and I thought, oh my God.
Yeah.
But that's a great talking point.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we got to get these kids ready. We're already almost a quarter of the way into the 21st century.
Yeah.
So, and buses, look at the price of buses. You guys, buses are get the kids to school. Look at the cost of these things. Now, the governor says, well, I want to go to electric. Okay. First of all, number one, an electric bus costs 3 times the amount of a regular bus. Second, it's not like you also go, Eddie, can you give me an extension cord? We got to plug the bus in. That's not how it works. You gotta have somebody said, well, we're gonna put in stations. Well, do you got enough juice at the barn? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've never thought of that. Well, another $500,000 worth of juice at the barn, we're all set. Meanwhile, you can't keep your capital reserve going because you're trying to keep your district alive.
Yeah.
So that's the thing I'm talking about. I like looking long-term and seeing where it's going. I'm sure, many of the superintendents, and there's some here on the call with us, they try to think long-term, but I think we should actually have a plan. To me, it's like, when are we buying our next snowplow? When are we buying our next stake rack truck? How many buses we got to buy 3 years from now? Wait a minute, we're always buying the same 10 buses, but to Tom's point, our enrollment is 200 kids less. Do we still need 10 buses, or are we on automatic pilot? So we have an obligation to tighten our ship as well, right? But at the same time, we don't have a lot to tax around here.
Yeah,
I mean, certain districts have more than others, obviously, but the truth of it is, especially the rural districts, there's not a lot to tax. I remember my first board meeting at Risking, somebody said, I think we got more cows than people. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But they weren't talking about it as if it was derogatory. What they're saying is we don't have a lot to tax. That was what they were talking about. What we have is a lot of fallow land, and it's just land. There's like nothing on it. So the key thing is you can't, what are you going to get out of it? So we need state support. Every penny counts. What I'm worried about is right now it appears like it's on a more robust trajectory than before, especially with this federal money. But if I told you, for instance, I'm going to give you a raise for the next 2 years, and after that, forget it.
Yeah.
You're on your own. You would say, what? Because I'm not going to stop giving you increases. I'm going to stop giving you the money.
Period.
The federal money. I'm going to quit paying you.
Well, Rick, I always like your term selective abandonment. It's something schools do not do. They just keep abandoning,
the other thing too is you got to find out what programs are not working. They may be everybody's favorite, but the truth of it is, if they don't work, you got to get rid of them to put something in that does work.
Yeah, especially with that federal funds coming, drying up eventually. Yeah.
So there's a lot to think about. I don't want to barrage you with all this, but the key thing is you're building your budgets now. I think good questions and good answers have to be forthcoming about how things are going and what you're doing with your money. But I'll tell you right now, I know many of you want to help the taxpayers out. I understand all that, by the way. I'm a taxpayer too. But the key thing is that if my taxes go down $30 or $40 or $50, I don't know. I mean, some people would really welcome that, but I got to tell you, it doesn't do much for anybody's economy. It would mean a lot to a district when you add it all up.
Yeah.
But, I've got people now saying a bus, they're buying a $147,000 bus. In 5 years, the bus is going to cost $167,000. Now, come on, where are we going here? You'll never get the money back. So if you haven't been on the cap already, you've already lost some of it. I don't know if I'd want to increase it much more.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be well liked, but sometimes we got to do the right thing, even if it's tough. But I think I gave you a model that your business official could easily put up a little slide on the old board there for you. Say, here's how we derived our tax cap the last 2 years, and here's why it came out the way it came out. And if you notice, it's not 2%.
Yeah, and Rick, I like your idea of putting something in the boardroom, so that John Q can see it, because again, that's most of the problem is having them understand that's not 2%.
Yeah, see, what I think is, it's obvious that to me, I believe in transparency. I did as a superintendent, any question, there's no question off bounds in terms of the money. I want to be transparent with everybody, especially the board has to understand it. I don't want the board to just listen to me and say, okay, Rick, I want the board on board.
Yeah. Well, listen, and if no other questions, Rick, thanks so much for your help.